And hello, hey, welcome along. And it's Kathy Frey here from the International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Organisation, and welcome along to this week's webinar. And a big hi from Freya Mahal. Freya, hello.
Hello, greetings from England, or actually Wales. I'm currently on holiday in Wales.
Oh, in Wales. Oh, greetings from there. And so Freya and I are going to be doing this webinar jointly today. So we've got basically a midwife from Australasia and a midwife from the UK. So we're crossing the planet, but it's the same. We were both so passionate that we want to talk about this topic because it's the same thing that we're dealing with all over the world. But look, Freya, do you want to just before we get started, do you want to just give a little your own introduction and explain you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So Freya Mahal, I've been a midwife now. So I've been working in the NHS for over 20 years, including my training, 21 years nearly. And so National Health Service, when I say NHS, as a midwife, but also 13 years ago, I set up my own business teaching antenatal classes and do that online internationally, plus local in-person classes. And then I teach hypnobirthing, and then I do the postnatal classes as well, parent and baby drop-ins and baby massage and baby yoga. So yeah, I'm also a mom and a wife. And yeah, I love just living, eating, breathing, all things midwifery and babies, really. I love to work alongside the parents as well. That's a big passion of mine, just kind of yeah, working alongside the parents and seeing community in amongst parents. That's what I love too, creating community.
It's just
because it's kind of, it can be lonely for a lot of people, so that's you know what I really love to do.
It absolutely is, and so it's so often with some of our more indigenous cultures, or particularly I see amongst Chinese and Indian, there's so much support for that woman. There's a lot of family around her postnatally, but certainly within our European population, we often see these women just so on their own, and creating that community is incredibly valuable. That's for sure. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me, so obviously I too am a midwife. I've also happened to have been New Zealand's best-selling birth, baby, motherhood author since about 2005. So writing is a bit of a kind of big thing for me. And both myself and Freya are volunteers working with IMCO. And we also volunteer on the Ask the Maternity Gurus forum, Facebook forum. And yeah, so we work together but this particular topic of large for dates and small for dates, goodness, there's just so often women are told something almost flippantly that will throw them into this place of fear. And that's what we want to sort of go over today, is really understanding small for dates, large for dates. But sometimes it might be just as a little comment, like maybe the obstetrician going, feeling the woman's belly and going, your baby's not too big. Or a sonographer doing a scan and just making a comment like, gosh, your baby's head's a good size. Just anything like these little tiny comments, and it just sends a woman into such a panic and a worry. Is my baby smaller than it should be? Is there something, what am I doing wrong? What can I do? And the same with the baby, if they think, oh my god, is it this huge baby with this enormous head, and how am I ever going to give birth to it, and things like it just goes into this real panic. So we've got just a few short slides that we've put together for you today, and whether you are a woman expecting or whether you are a maternity health professional, particularly birth practitioners, it's all relevant to everybody, because it's you know, this is understanding the basics. So we'll just I'll just screen share and we will get onto this. So start screen. I'm going to see if this actually works. Okay. Is that sharing okay, Freya?
I can't see it sharing just yet.
Oh, you can't see it sharing just yet. All right. No? Oh, why is it not working? Okay. We'll try again.
Technology. Yeah, I think it's starting now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's starting.
But if I do this,
slideshow.
Is that looking great?
Looking great.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to be talking about small for dates and large for dates babies, and what that is and how that's defined. Now, for those of you who are a midwife or an obstetrician, you'll probably be looking at our sneaky photo going, that's a twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome looking there. But that's a whole other topic. But what it does demonstrate is very much a small for dates and a large for dates babies. You know, we have this, so often when women are having scans, you know, towards in that third trimester, and you know, they'll make a comment of, oh my goodness, my baby's measuring two weeks behind or 2 weeks ahead or something. And we do have to remember that just babies naturally vary in size anyway, you know, so anything from kind of about 2.5 kilos to 4.5 kilos, 4.5 kilos is normal. So of course, by the time you get to 30 weeks or something, your baby's not going to be measuring spot on average, or maybe it will, but you know, if it's anything 2 or 3, or even up to 4 weeks either side, then it's still all within normal range. But certainly once a baby is kind of, you know, above 4 weeks difference, then that is something that, you know, is a little bit of a red flag that maybe that baby's small for dates or large for dates. So, okay, so the first thing that we want to explain today is really just the definitions of them. So a baby that's petite and it's not necessarily small for dates. And a baby that's a bit chunky is not necessarily large for dates. So how is that actually defined? And the sort of gold standard that we use these days is where the estimated fetal weight is plotted on a customized growth chart. And that's really important, that it's customized. And that means that it is based on the woman's height, race, age, her pre-pregnancy weight, and the weights of any previous babies that she's had. So all of that is entered in, and that becomes her customized growth chart. For us here in New Zealand, as an example, we have a huge Polynesian community here. In fact, Auckland City is the largest Polynesian city in the world. But we also have a huge Chinese community here. And Polynesian, you know, if you didn't customize the chart, you would find babies that are small for dates, but actually for a Chinese woman, it's not small. The baby's a completely normal size. Or in the reverse, we'll have babies that would be measuring enormously on birth charts until we realize they're a Polynesian baby, and those are chunky babies. And that's absolutely normal for that race. So it's very important that a customized growth chart is done. And there are good, easy online systems that you know, all midwives and obstetricians should really be using to always check that. Yeah, so that's the first thing, is that estimated fetal weight needs to be customized. Bearing in mind that an estimated fetal weight is just that, it's an estimation. It's not saying this is what the baby weighs. And we all would have, Freya, had those times, right, where there's been a growth scan done quite close to when that baby is being born, and you know, and you're feeling the baby with your hands on the belly, thinking, yeah, I don't think that scan weight is right. This is a different baby. And then out comes the baby, and probably the biggest, I have had differences up to a kilo, which is massive, right?
Yeah.
Differences, but we see that all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, they always say, or like we hear that really the scans are correct, give or take 2 pounds, which is like a kilo. That's a huge discrepancy. And I think unless the woman is having really regular growth scans, then they start to get a bit more accurate in terms of estimating fetal weight. But I've known really embarrassing situations of like someone having a cesarean because this baby's so large or so small, and then it just comes out very average weight and the scan's got it completely wrong.
Yeah, ditto. Absolutely. Or when somebody is in labor and there's kind of like this decision made a little bit on the early side that it's an obstructed labor, and it's going, look, I think there's no point carrying on with the pushing, let's just go and get this baby delivered, right? Because the scan said it's 5.5 kilos and it comes out at 4.5 kilos, and you know, it's still a good size, but it was deliverable. So it very much influences almost more than it should be. And as you're saying, unless you're seeing a plotted some regular growth scans, so you can see that serial changes, sort of a bit of a random one-off can still be off a lot. And yeah, so that's the first thing. But we, you know, it's the best tool that we have, apart from actually a midwife's hands. That's often when you've got a very skilled midwife who's been around a few years, she can have a difference of opinion within a scan sometimes, right?
That's correct. Do you know what's crazy though? I've worked in 3 different hospitals in my career, and the one that I'm currently working in, we've stopped using customized growth charts. They don't use them, which is, yeah, I know. And yeah,
Right.
and I think they argue that they might miss things, but yeah, I mean, there are arguments for and against, but it's really strange because when I remember when these first came in, and I was working in Birmingham, and in the population in Birmingham, we've got a lot of Indian and Pakistani women, a lot of African women, and yeah, it totally worked for them because, like you say, you know, these smaller Asian women are going to have smaller babies, and the population that I'm working with now is also really mixed. And it's just, I think the real reason, I have to be careful what I say, but I think there's one consultant who is just anti them, and he is kind of driven this. And yeah, it's mad because the amount of people who end up induced because of a large or small baby, it's just crazy. And yeah, I'll get on my soapbox if I carry on.
Oh, and I'll be hopping on that soapbox with you. Yeah, I mean, that's bad,
Yeah,
right?
I know, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? It feels really backwards.
It does feel really backwards, and you know, that's the thing, right? Is so if we do see that, don't we? That sometimes we've got some really just got the incredible power, and yeah, it just influence a whole hospital in that way, even though it's now the gold standard. Yeah, goodness me. Okay, so when we go through these small for dates babies, there's basically two kinds of small for dates, or SGA, small for gestational age. There's kind of two kinds of them, and that's the thing that is really so important to be able to identify, is that basically, is this baby just a healthy, normal baby who happens to physiologically just be petite? And particularly when you've got I've seen it particularly, I'm sure you're saying, a mixed race couple. So maybe we've got a Polynesian woman who's with a Chinese man, and she just happens in this pregnancy to be growing a bit of a petite little Chinese baby, who's not really taking after the Polynesian, and the whole thing can happen in reverse, where we've got a little petite Chinese woman whose partner's a big whacking strong Polynesian, and she's growing a Polynesian baby. But yeah, so that's the first thing, is to just, so is it just a petite and a totally healthy baby that happens to be petite, and that child will probably always be petite, and we all know people who are petite, and that there's nothing unhealthy about that. Or the thing is, are we dealing with a pathologically growth restricted sort of baby, where it just should have better growth on it? So there's a really simple way that tends to be done, and that is abdominal circumference versus head circumference. So generally speaking, we would expect that the abdominal circumference and a head circumference are about the same. If we've got a baby whose abdominal circumference is larger, then it means it's a chunky, well-growing, happy, bonny baby, and that's fantastic. When we see that the abdominal circumference is less than the head circumference, then that tells us that we've got a skinny baby on board. So again, it might be just naturally petite, but we want to really be able to identify that, and those serial growth scans become so important, plotted across that customized growth chart, because we want the baby to follow the curve and not be dropping off the curve, which becomes a very big red flag that the placental sufficiency, or the placenta is being a little insufficient and maybe not giving the baby the levels of nutrients that it's needing. And that's when we can start to say, okay, this is a growth restricted baby, or IUGR. I know when I started midwifery, it used to be called, the IUGR was intrauterine growth retardation, and yeah, that was never a word that went down well with mothers, right?
It was the same when I started my training, and that one was a relief when that got phased out.
Yeah, so we phased out growth retardation and caused it growth restriction, because people were, obviously mums and partners were getting pretty freaked out that their baby was retarded. Yeah, so no, that's a big change. So anything you want to add into that explanation?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head really there, Kathy, that when a baby's following that curve, kind of going up, it is still following that curve, even if that curve is on the lower side, then that's your small for gestational age baby. When it's dropping off that curve, that's when it's potentially your IUGR baby. And I guess all IUGR babies will be SGA, but not all SGA babies will be IUGR, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So you've got, all the babies are SGA, and some are physiological, and some are pathological, and when they're pathological, we call them sometimes people will say FGRs as well, so fetal growth restriction, but it's the same animal. And so when it is plotted on the customized growth chart, if that baby is under the 10th centile, then that is an area to be. That's where we want to keep that extra monitoring going on to identify that it is just physiological, it's happy, it's all just going well. Or if once it gets below the 5th centile, then yeah, that's quite a red flag that we really should, there needs to be some good monitoring going on. And other things that they will do, they're when they do, actually I think that's on the next slide. So that's explaining really how we identify a SGA baby, which may be regarded as an IUGR. Do you want to go through our large for dates macrosomics?
Yeah. Only I've just noticed a mistake on our PowerPoint. That should be 90th, shouldn't it? So I estimated.
Oh yes, it should be. Not above the 10th, it should be above the 90th. So opposite.
Yeah, sorry, we missed that. But yeah, so our large for gestational dates or macrosomic babies, those ones are the ones that tend to be above the 90th centile on the customized growth chart. And again, I think this is the whole thing of looking at that curve. If they're always just on that larger curve, but they're following it nicely, this doesn't necessarily mean that, panic stations, when those babies are kind of, that curve's going whoop and it's sort of flying up, and it was on the 25th centile and now it's on the 90th, then that maybe we need to be looking at why. But I also think that we've lost a lot of confidence in women to give birth to bigger babies. So I've always said, as a midwife and a mom, I would much rather be birthing or catching, as we call it, a 4-kilo baby than I would a 2-kilo baby. So I think the bigger babies have got a lot more oomph behind them. They're able to help themselves more on the way out. And we so often talk, parents get so concerned about the weight of the baby. I had a client recently who said, they've said my baby's estimated weight is like 3.6 kilos. And she looked all panicked. And I was like, this is 8 pounds. And I was like, that's completely normal weight. She was like, that's huge. And it's just people's perception of what is considered a large baby or what is the norm. It's just way off. And we forget, actually, it's really the head circumference that, is the bit that's the biggest bit that's got to be born. You could have I give the example of my firstborn. He was 7 pounds 8. So what's that, like 3.2 kilos or something? I can never convert it quickly in my head, so apologies, but very average weight. But his head circumference was 36 centimeters, which is above average. So it's normally sort of 34 tends to be your average, 32 to 34. But he had a large head. Okay. But I mean, I had a home birth and didn't need any sutures, didn't need stitches, because actually our bodies are designed to give birth to these babies. And if he'd have carried on and had like chunkier body, still his head was the biggest bit that was being born. So even if he was 9 pounds or 10 pounds in weight, rather than the 7 pounds 8 that he was, like, it's almost irrelevant if he's got a little bit, bit longer, chunkier legs. He actually was quite skinny in terms of his actual weight. He was long and lean. But yeah, I think we've got so hung up about expecting women to give birth to these really small babies, and we've lost all confidence. And I was chatting to you earlier, wasn't I, Kathy, and we were just saying about how so often when women, just like you said, when an obstetrician or a midwife comments, it might just be a small comment about, babies growing on the bigger side, or just a little comment, or we're just going to keep an eye on baby's weight because but I've heard people saying things like, they're off the scale. They're not off the scale at all. They're just kind of going along that natural curve. And like you said, you know, you chat to the couple and, you know, dad was a 9-pound baby. So, okay, you're going to expect something maybe similar. But instead, then the woman becomes fearful. As soon as that comment's made, that's all they focus on, isn't it? And I've had so many of my clients get in touch. Oh, the doctor said this, or the midwife said that. And they get so worried about it. But actually, well, maybe we'll come on to that in a little bit later. But the fear is never a good thing.
No, it's absolutely not. And the damage that it does is huge. And that's why we wanted to focus on these topics today, because we see it. It's typically a little tiny flippant remark. And even then, you know, the sonographer or the radiologist might say, oh yes, you know, the baby's a good size or something, and then it's plotted and it's sitting on the 70th centile, and you go, well, that's awesome, that's a fabulous size. But still in that woman's head, she's thinking, yeah, but it's big, it's not 50th, it's 70th. You know, man, no. And you know, I'll compare one of my birth stories. This is before I was a midwife, which kind of inspired me into becoming a midwife, was having babies. But our middle baby was an IUGR, which was undetected. And I can honestly, hand on heart, say I have never had a woman as a client give birth to a baby as tall as she was, weighing as little as she did. So she's literally the skinniest baby I've ever seen, and it was my own baby. And so, but she was the tallest and lightest of all my babies. She was like 5.5 pounds. She was just nothing. But she had the biggest head circumference. So weight is not a lot, right? You know, and it was not a big head circumference. It was a regular, but you know, they vary, sort of 34 to 36 centimeters, somewhere in there. She was a 36er. And yet, yes, so the birthing of the head is just not relevant to the weight of the baby. But we use estimated fetal weights as a way to really, as I say, serially gauge what's going on with the trends of that baby. And also when they do serial growth scans, they also do the other measurements of the baby. So femur length, head circumference, abdominal circumference, etc. And that we have growth charts for that, which also get plotted. So on their own, one measurement really doesn't mean a lot, but it's when we can see the pattern that that baby's not following the curve and the baby's coming off the curve, and starting to have a slowing of growth, you know, or the other way around with the large fedates, where they just cut it there, they kind of go, woo. But another thing I used to have to point out to women a lot is that anything from 37 to 42 weeks, of course, is a normal time to give birth. So a baby that at, say, 37 weeks is plotting as large for dates is still not large for that woman. Now, by the time that baby keeps growing for another month or 5 weeks, then that could be kind of largish, but genuinely large. But a large for dates at 36 or 37 or 38 weeks is not large for dates. Or so does that kind of, could you want to re-explain that? I'm wondering if I made that make sense.
Yeah, I think so. I guess, just that for a woman to give birth, if the baby's kind of going along the 90th centile, is what you're saying, and then they're but they give birth at 37 weeks, so their body kind of goes, right, we're done, this baby's ready to come out, then that's a completely normal sized baby for them to birth. if they got to 42 weeks, it could be that they're getting slightly on the larger side. Is that what you're saying? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So it when you sort of plot it up the charts, I would sort of draw a line sideways and go, well, if that baby was that weight and you were now 41 weeks and 3 days, which some research says is the average date a first baby is born, is 40 weeks and plus 10. So if that baby is born then at that weight, it's not a large baby.
Yeah.
So I would say to women, look, if you're being told that you've got because it depends on the when it's born, it's 41 weeks onwards is probably when it's genuinely getting, a bit chunky for the pelvis, but we'll head into that. So let's just move across to the next slide. So now we're going to sort of talk about the management of those two of those scenarios of the SGAs and the large for dates babies. And large for dates, LFD, also is known as LGA, so large for gestational age. So yeah, they're all the same thing, same animal. Yeah, so so looking at obstetric, so what we're going to talk about is we've got this slide and one more slide. And this one is going to be talking about the obstetric management, and then the next slide is going to be additional holistic cares. So firstly, in an obstetric, how is it managed under the system, under the allopathic hospitalized medical system? How do we deal with these babies? So firstly, with our physiological SGAs, so just our naturally familial, petite, healthy babies, it's basically just normal cares for them, and maybe sort of ultrasounds done every 2 to 3 or 4 weeks, depending on kind of what's been going on. So it's just kind of like let's keep a little eye on them, kind of just management really on that one. And we simply await spontaneous labor. There's absolutely no foundation to be inducing a woman who has a naturally petite baby that's healthy and normal otherwise. So if the estimated fetal weight is under 2.5 kilos, then we would be sort of looking at saying, well, let's do some continuous fetal heart monitoring during that labor, because the baby, exactly what Freya said is, as midwives, we would way prefer to be catching 4 kilo babies than 2 kilo babies, because those 4 kilo babies are robust, they handle the labor well, they've got plenty in reserve. But our little babies, they just don't have perhaps the same robustness. And we see it at the other end as well, that these can often be the babies that need a little bit of topping up with express breast milk and things, just because they kind of run out of energy a little bit to have really good feeds, whereas those big babies, oh man, they just go for it with their breastfeeding. So yeah, we do look at having a little bit of extra monitoring of their fetal heart during the labor, because they're just a little bit more at risk of perhaps having a bit of fetal distress. And then post-birth, we would do glucose monitoring. So those, whether the baby's small for dates or large for dates, they are a little bit more at risk that they could become hypoglycemic, so they could get low blood sugars in the first little while after after being born. So what we want to see is that they've got 12 hours of good levels of blood glucose without needing to be supported through that. And once they've got 12 hours under their belt, we're going, yep, you're all good now. And with the IUGR babies, those that are pathologically growth restricted, then we are there's a bigger vigilance on their ultrasound scans, so once or twice a week sometimes, particularly as if they're following the curve, it might be that sort of once a week, and if they start leveling off, then it can become twice a week, and they would be routinely also including Dopplers of the placental blood flow, and a BPP, which is a biophysical profile done of the baby, and once we start to see a abnormal Dopplers with a falling off of the growth, that's the big red flag, right?
Yeah, although I'm finding more and more often that women end up falling into the IUGR pathway when they have just got a baby that's SGA. So I keep seeing
that.
Yeah, I just keep seeing basically women end up induced for a small baby. And it's so infuriating because, again, it's like, what's normal for her? Or, I had a client and she is very petite, very slim. Her husband's petite, very slim. And then she was induced because this baby was small. And he was born like 5 pounds 2 or something, which he just looked like he belonged to those parents, but they induced it. And they again, it's those words that make you fearful of like, oh, if we don't induce you, but actually her baby had always kind of followed that sort of 10th, 12th centile. Wasn't that he was dropping off particularly, going lower. So yeah, and very infuriating. I see more and more intervention that appears to be unnecessary.
Yeah, and that is that outcome that when we see a legitimate IUGR baby where the Dopplers are abnormal, that baby is absolutely plateauing out, it's just not putting on the weight that it should be, it's become pretty obvious, then an induction is the right thing that's going on. And I know that there's just so many midwives on the planet, myself and Freya included, who are so frustrated at the incredibly ridiculously high levels of induction. It should not be going on. But this is the time that it gets recognized. It goes, yes, this baby is in trouble. It's going to be, it needs to come out because it's not receiving the nutrients that it needs through the placenta. And it's the right thing. Now that that induction of labor is because of the abnormal Dopplers and because of the stopping or plateauing of that fetal growth. It's the right thing. We shouldn't be inducing as we do to the numbers that we do. It's absolutely insane. And what it gets forgotten about, just, I don't know how, it just seems to get forgotten about along the way, is that inductions carry their own significant set of risks. Yeah. And, it is so much safer for both the mother and the baby to wait until that woman naturally goes into spontaneous, strong active labor. That's the safest thing statistically. So we should only ever be inducing when it is strongly medically indicated. And abnormal Dopplers with a plateauing of growth is a strong indication. But yeah, plain old SGA, it's frustrating, isn't it, if we start to see these SGA babies being thrown into the IUGR pathway of management, when we just basically know better.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found really frustrating in the UK, and maybe this is a worldwide issue, I don't know, but there seems to be less and less continuity of care. So it just feels like women are seeing a different midwife each appointment, and all of us measure slightly differently. I think that's we can acknowledge that. Yeah. But then if it's the same person measuring every time, then they're gonna pick up a baby that's suddenly growing loads or suddenly trailed off. Whereas instead you've got 2 different midwives, 3 different midwives, 4 different midwives, all measuring slightly differently, sending women for growth scans that were essentially probably not necessary. And then that puts kind of anxiety into the woman. And then, for example, another midwife, I've literally had people being sent for a scan because their baby's too small, and the next week sent for a scan because the baby's too big. And it's just crazy, and it's just different ways of measuring. And yeah, then what ends up happening is they end up having multiple scans. They end up down a kind of higher risk route. They end up seeing a consultant instead of a midwife, and obstetrician instead of a midwife, and then lo and behold, suddenly they're being induced because they've kind of slipped into this higher risk pathway that was probably not even remotely relevant. So I see this more and more.
Yeah, and in New Zealand, where I happen to have worked, we do have a pretty strong continuity of care system, meaning that most women have a what they call an LMC, a lead maternity carer, who's a midwife who is looking after them, seeing them antenatally, attends their birth and does their home visits. But that is not the norm on the planet, which is why New Zealand is recognised as being one of the top countries in the planet by the World Health Organization to have babies, because of that continuity of care system. But because you're right, particularly when we're doing fundal heights, which is when you're putting the tape measure across the belly, that is something that is just it's a great system when you've got the same midwife or obstetrician doing the measurements all the time. It does become quite reliable, or a strong indication, but it's a pretty useless way to measure when you've got a different midwife or a different obstetrician doing it every time. So we know that research is showing that it is one of those things that requires the continuity. So that's why somebody will do a measurement and go, oh, it's 5 weeks, if it's 5 centimeters over or under, and it goes, oh, okay, so we've got the backup system of the scans. So then we go and do the measurements there and do the estimated fetal weight. But as we just mentioned, the estimated fetal weight can be so off as well. So at the end of the day, often it is, I remember when I was a junior midwife, seeing a very senior midwife have quite a heated argument with a senior obstetrician, where he was saying the scan is saying that this baby is large for dates, and this midwife stood her ground and goes, I have palpated that baby, which is feeling the belly. I am telling you, there's no way that baby's large for dates. And it wasn't. So sometimes there can be almost a lack of trusting your hands and believing in technology a little bit. And sometimes we need to go a bit old school, don't we, and go, what does this baby actually feel like? Does it feel incredibly large under our hands or not? So if we go now into the management of our large for dates or macrosomic babies, that's the same thing. So again, we're talking about the babies that are over the 90th centile on a customized growth chart. So sort of at the 90th centile, you're going, okay, is this baby a little bit chunky, a bit large for dates or macrosomic? Once we get to the 95th centile, then we're sort of a little bit more going, yeah, okay, it's a good size. So again, we've got pathological large for dates and we've got physiological large for dates. So just like the SGA babies. Do you want to go through that, Freya?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean the pathological ones, we're certainly looking if we need to rule out gestational diabetes, and that seems to be on the increase so much due to people's diet and lifestyle. And so I mean we are seeing just an influx of women who end up with gestational diabetes. My husband and I spoke on this fairly recently on an IMCO webinar, and yeah, just like the attitude of this one seems to be like, oh, it's just normal, it's just one of those things, and so we are seeing more large for dates babies because of that. And this is when they are put at risk, the baby themselves, because after they're born, we're going to have to check their glucose monitor. We're going to have to monitor their glucose measures, because they are at risk of hypoglycemia, so low blood sugars, after they've lost that constant supply from the placenta. So that is definitely something that we need to monitor. And because it does seem to be on the increase, there seems to be an unprecedented number of women being sent for GTTs, the glucose tolerance tests, to see whether, you know, that is a genuine reason that we're seeing more babies that are large for dates or large for gestational age. But then you've got your kind of regular babies that are just a good sized baby. And like we were saying, that maybe that's just the norm for them, that they or their partner were fairly big when they were born, or they're just quite broad, and yeah, it's about not losing sight that these babies can be born completely normally, that our pelvises are shaped and sized, that we can push these babies out. However, I think as soon as a woman is told that their babies are large, this is like what I was saying about when the fear sets in, and I've seen so many women just kind of end up, rather than just believing, yeah, okay, a bigger baby is often easier to birth than a smaller, scrappier baby. Instead of them thinking that way, you know, that seed is planted in their head, and often ends up kind of, just, I teach in my hypnobirthing about staying calm, because the moment you're not calm, the moment you go into fight or flight mode in birth, in labor, it just slows everything down. It just prevents your body being able to do what it's designed to do. So, and then we talk a bit about just being aware of the risk of shoulder dystocia with a larger baby, which is where the shoulders get stuck on the way out. That said, I had a client the other day whose baby was 7.2 pounds, so that is not a big baby. That was a shoulder dystocia, because we all know that it isn't actually always, you know, it's a bony issue rather than a large baby issue. And although we recognize that sometimes they're at slightly higher risk, it's not a given. And so McRoberts there is the maneuver where we kind of get their legs back like this. Now, in an ideal world, that can be done on someone's hands and knees, so that they're kind of squatting into that natural position and just opening up the pelvis. Sadly, what we often see is that involves legs in stirrups, or just kind of being pushed back by health professionals, that they're kind of holding the legs back with a woman on her back. It doesn't have to be done that way, but just I guess sort of widening that pelvis. And I think if a woman's really well educated on how their pelvis works, in what positions, and the best position to make that outlet the widest as possible, then we don't necessarily need to do that kind of on her back into McRoberts position. And yeah, it's not possible to scan and predict the sort of head to pelvis proportion, CPD as it's written there. I've known, like, a friend of mine who, she had her babies in Brazil. Now in Brazil there's a 90% cesarean section rate, mostly due to the fact that if you've got any money you'll go private, and then for the doctors it's kind of easier to schedule in a cesarean, isn't it? And she was told every time, oh, your baby's head's way too big for your pelvis. And then when she was telling me about the scan, she said, oh, they said though that they couldn't actually show me the baby's head on the scan because it was too far down. So I was like, so it's too far down in that pelvis that was too small to carry it. This is just making no sense.
Oh, if that baby's head is so far, so deeply engaged, it's a strong indication it's fitting very well indeed.
But she was just, you know, her obstetrician just said to her how much more dangerous natural birth was than a cesarean, which we all know is nonsense. But she was scared into having those elective cesareans. All three of her babies were born in Brazil by cesarean. And, you know, there's always a time and a place for a cesarean. Don't get me wrong. Of course there is. Thank goodness for them. There'd be lots of moms and babies who wouldn't be here without them. But I think there's actually just a good sized baby isn't a reason for a cesarean. Yeah, so we do monitor the blood glucose in a baby if they are on the larger side, just to be certain that they are just a bigger baby, or that there is actually something else going on here, because we could potentially have missed that gestational diabetes in a woman, and especially if we really weren't expecting them to be on the bigger side. If nobody had predicted that, either by palpating, by feeling, or by scan, suddenly this large baby arrives, it can be like, oh, hang on a minute, have we missed something here? And certainly in the UK or local to where I work, we always scan the hips of all female babies. We do that if a baby's been persistently breech at any point of the pregnancy. We scan their hips, and then again if they're large for gestational age. So if it's an over 4 kilo girl, we will scan their hips when they're 6 weeks old, just to keep that close eye on them, that there isn't any hip dysplasia that's gone on, which can occasionally happen. It's quite rare, but I guess by scanning them all, you're going to pick up more likely on the ones that have had that hip dysplasia.
Yeah, the gestational diabetes, for those who may be wondering, why does gestational diabetes make large babies? And it's basically because the blood glucose is received by the mother, supplies the blood glucose to the baby. So when she's diabetic, she's hyperglycemic, so she's giving all this sugar-rich blood or sugar-rich to the baby, but the baby's own pancreas has to produce the insulin to cope with the blood sugar. So what happens is the baby is producing quite high levels, abnormally high levels of insulin to cope. And so once the baby is born, it's still doing these high levels of insulin. So the baby's own insulin can make the baby itself hypoglycemic. So it can suddenly get into this very low blood glucose until it sort of levels out. And once it's had 12 hours of normal level, then the baby has got used to the fact, the baby's body has got used to the fact that the mother's sugar-rich blood supply is no longer there. But the side effect of all of that insulin is that it acts as a growth promoter in the baby as well, and also it can inhibit the maturing of the lungs from a surfactant perspective. So out can come these babies. We would call them cherub babies, where they're just, there's no neck. I mean, babies don't have a neck anyway, right? But it's just these round heads, and yeah, so we talk, and you think, goodness me, you are a bonny looking baby, and maybe your mother became diabetic and it wasn't picked up. So that's why those babies. The other side effect is that that we will see in utero is that the diabetes can make the baby basically wee more, and that produces more fluid around the baby. So often we think that the baby is floating around in just this wonderful amniotic fluid, but actually, particularly by the time they're getting into the third trimester, most of it's just baby urine. So it's producing more urine because diabetes makes us wee more, a lot of extra fluid. Okay, so and the I used to sort of explain to, when we've got a woman who we know has a particularly chunky baby on board, then that's where we might be talking about with them ahead of time and saying, look, once that baby's head is born, we're gonna maybe put you into a, get you into a position like this and sort of explain it. And I would often say to women that when you're birthing, the head. It's all about you wanting the pelvis to open up this way, so the legs are sort of out this way. But when but then once the head is born, the baby does this rotation, so it's kind of coming out sideways with the shoulders. And so at that point, we want the pelvis to be opening this way. So that's where we will be. There's maneuvers that kind of lift up the legs a bit and sort of open up the pelvis that way for the shoulders. But yeah, so that's a little bit about the obstetric management. Is there anything more you want to add on to that, Freya, before we go to the next slide?
No, that's good.
Cool. Okay. So the last thing that we want to go over is the additional holistic cares. So with your large phonites babies that are macrosomic, look, there's not really any specific naturopathic cares that we would introduce or suggest during the pregnancy, except to ensure that the mother is very well nutriented, because obviously she's growing a big baby. So the baby will steal from her body all the minerals and vitamins that it needs and leave her depleted. So just making sure that her own needs are being, because as soon as that baby's born, she needs to now start to be doing breastfeeding. So she needs good stores herself. It's because the baby does that, behave like a parasite within there. In that system. But with our SGA babies, particularly more to the point, our IUGRs. So our babies who are having a struggle of growth going on, it's clearly nearly always placental related. So, okay, so so we'll just go through our sort of dot point here. But firstly, the mother and the partner substantially altering her lifestyle to significantly reduce stress on the pregnancy. So less work, more rest. And that means that the partner needs to be helping with stuff as well. Should she be up doing the housework, vacuuming? No. Rest, 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 rest. Should she still be going to work? No. This is more important. And I know I'll get a bit passionate on this one. But I know that, often women and their partners can be the worst ones in this, get so caught up on their limit of their maternity leave, and well, I can't because I can't emphasize enough how important this is above maternity leave. Because if you are, for example, 30 weeks pregnant and your baby has been diagnosed as IUGR, well, if you gave birth tomorrow, you are leaving work and you will be every day in that hospital, all day, every day for the next couple of months. So you wouldn't be saying to the hospital, oh no, I can't come in and see my baby today because I need to go to work. You won't be saying that. And it's the same thing now. You need to say, look, this is the priority, is we need to reduce stress on this mother's body, because her body is telling us it's not coping with the pregnancy. And so we have to do everything to help her body cope with the pregnancy, so her body can support her baby's placenta, which will support the baby. So the mother drastically increasing protein consumption, because often if you kind of think of carbs as being energy and fruit and veg as being minerals and vitamins, protein is structure. Protein's what builds a baby. And often we'll say, just go get yourself some protein shake powder. I mean, great if you go to a health shop and get some really wonderful, fantastic protein powder. But if you can't afford that, just buy a can of the protein powder that is protein and have some protein. It's you need to increase your protein consumption. So protein every meal. Look, it might be eggs at breakfast and baked beans at lunch and meat at night or whatever it is, but protein in every meal and a couple of protein shakes a day. And I have seen dramatic improvements on babies when their mums will do that. And the mother engaging with a naturopathic maternity wellness clinician. So, for example, a qualified medical herbalist. So think of the obstetricians as being our unwellness, our maternity unwellness experts, because that's exactly what they are. But there are maternity wellness experts, and those are our holistic naturopaths. And so getting that woman onto a customized regime of supplements to make sure she's got all that micronutrition that she needs to really support her body, to support her baby's placenta, to support her baby. And also seeing a acupuncturist and a homeopath can make a difference as well. So particularly probably my two favorite things would be them seeing a naturopathic medical herbalist and an acupuncturist, and often that's actually one person, because quite often medical herbalists are trained in acupuncture as well. And because the acupuncture just improves the whole life force meridian in the woman, and that impacts that life force meridians in the baby as well. But those would be my absolute favorite picks, and they make such a big difference. What's your thoughts on all of that, Freya?
Yeah, I think just to add to what you're saying, like totally agree, but just to add with the first point, and maybe this is really obvious, but a big risk of IUGR is in smoking women. So women who smoke cigarettes, and that, that just kind of kills the placenta slowly, and therefore the placenta is not functioning well, and therefore the baby doesn't get the nutrients that they need. So I think just that's possibly an obvious one. Don't smoke, or at least seek out support. I think everywhere there seems to be good support now, that recognition that it's just it's no good to be smoking during pregnancy. But also, then reducing the stress in the pregnancy would help then not to smoke. And the only thing I'd add to that about, I totally agree, using any annual leave that you have to reduce your hours whilst working, especially in the third trimester, or just quitting working completely in that latter stage. I mean, I'm also always banging on to women about this, like you are, Kathy, about they think, oh, it's so much better to work as close to the due date as possible, and it just isn't. It's just asking for things not to be going well, and not just about resting as in putting your feet up, but mentally resting. So doing some mindfulness or some meditation, something that's just going to calm you down. This is what I teach in my hypnobirthing as well. Just kind of skills and resources to be able to stay in that rest and progress, or rest and digest mode, not into a fight or flight mode. That has a huge impact. And I think it's really important just to actually spend some time in the latter stages of the pregnancy focusing on the baby. This is a very selfless thing to do. It's not selfish to think, right, I'm just going to stop working earlier than I think I should. And I've a midwife friend of mine recently, she ended up finishing work at 33 weeks. So she still had a while to go. And within a week, she said, oh my goodness, I feel so much better. And she's now 37 weeks and she's doing great. And I think she's had a lot of time to just mentally prepare, physically prepare. And there's so much to be said for that. And reducing that stress, definitely. And then the only other thing I would say is just moving on to the large for dates, babies. Totally agree with what you've said, Kathy, but just also recognizing again about that protein consumption, because so many people fill their diet with carbs, with grains, and actually they just turn to sugar. And so actually that's going to, impact on that large for dates, whereas your good protein levels It's good to get a bit of a balance, but I think people, they think they're having enough protein and they're really not, you know. Oh, I had 1 or 2 eggs for breakfast. No, have 5, you know, like, so I think that's the other thing, just to mention that, yeah, really good protein levels, making that a big part of your meals is, filling up on proteins rather than on carbs is definitely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are like, oh, but you know, as you say with the eggs, so that yeah, you're building a body. So what will a bodybuilder eat? And that's what you want to do, because you're building a body as well, especially with those IUGRs.
Yeah.
So, and with the often women would still asking me, you know, what do I recommend about work, and even for a completely healthy normal pregnancy, my absolute kind of gold standard of work recommendations is part-time from 28 weeks and not working from 32. And that's just what I always say to everybody. And as long as they're part-time from 28 weeks and not working from 32, we just have so few problems. In fact, I can hand on heart say that every single client I've ever had who's had a premature labor is a woman who is still working. And I think what happens is her body makes that decision. And it just goes, look, I can't go to work every day and grow a baby. And you're not stopping the working, so I'm stopping this pregnancy. And it just goes, I can't do it anymore. Goes into labor and we have a premature baby. So it is huge. And often women would say, oh, well, I was planning to stop a month before I'm due. Well, your due date, of course, is not a due date. It's a terrible word to call it. It's an estimated 40-week gestation, and you're due anywhere from 37 to 42 weeks. So I agree that you should stop a month before you're due, and that's why I'm saying stop work at 32 weeks, because 5 weeks later you're due at 37 weeks. So understanding where that month is.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I just wish women would really listen to this. And I hear women saying, oh, I'll be bored. And it's like, no, especially if this is their first baby, right? They will never, ever get this time back again, where they're not working and they don't have another child to look after. It's like precious, that time.
It is so precious, right? I mean, you go, oh, you know, I'll be bored. Well, just love it, revel in it, because it could be a decade until that happens again.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes there's a story that I would tell people where, you know, because I had a baby, and then, you know, just under 2 years later had another baby, and about 2.5 years later had another baby. So that was, you know, that sort of becomes 10 years of having at least one preschooler, you know. And I recall there's a swimming pool that lovely hot pools that used to be not far from where we lived when the kids were little, and we'd often go there with the kids. And I remember they had the main pool, and then they have this like pool where you can like have a drink and watch a movie. And so my husband and I are sitting in this main pool watching the movie, and the kids are all, you know, they're 12, 14, 16 now, they're out all playing. And I remember saying to my husband, oh my God, this is the first time in, you know, more in a dozen years that we have sat in this pool without children, without supervising children. And even then we were breaking the rules, because the 12-year-old should have been supervised, but we had one there with a mate. I thought those two will be all right, and the other older two will look after them, because we were going to enjoy the movie pool for a minute. But can you imagine it? For 12 years, you have not been alone in a pool. So that month when you're bored, oh, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it.
Yeah,
just years till you and your husband can go and have a swim together. Enjoy your kingdom.
just being able to take a nap when you choose to, like, you know, I haven't slept so well, then you can have a nap whenever you like. You know, you can't do that very easily once the baby arrives. It's so, I mean, when I went off on maternity leave, that was kind of, I suffered from hyperemesis and, amongst other things, had wonderful births but tough pregnancies. And as soon as I'd finished work, that was the only bit of my pregnancy really that I enjoyed. And I had like lists of books I wanted to read, movies I wanted to watch, people I wanted to meet for a coffee, cupboards I wanted to clean out, you know, just all these things of just kind of not stressful things, not you know, being on the go. But I could have done that for another month or so quite happily.
Yeah, it's so good. And it's so important for that woman mentally to slow down and get ready. Because we both will have often seen that situation. It's almost a level of trauma when a woman is going straight from work to birthing her baby. You know, I mean, I remember this happening to a very close girlfriend of mine who, you know, worked right up till 36 and a half weeks basically. And she, you know, she gave up work on the Friday and she had the baby on the Saturday, and she wasn't ready. You know, it just, she was in such shock for such a long time. And it really headed into that whole postnatal depression. We just know that that's a big ramification. Yeah, so important to just enjoy it. And at the other end, you know, especially if women are say they're on a 1-year maternity leave type situation, where their company's holding their job for them, and they might be leave without pay for a year or whatever, then again, that, you know, the baby is never going to remember if you go back to work when it's 11 months old or whether it's 12 months old. The baby won't ever care. But that woman having that time ahead so that she doesn't get preeclamptic toxemia, so she doesn't become get gestational diabetes late, so that her baby doesn't become growth restricted, so that she doesn't have preterm labor of a premature baby. All those things are the big four that I just see such a correlation between women working and way beyond when I think they should be, and them always insisting, oh, I'm fine. Yeah, well, you might be, but your pregnancy and your baby's not. And there's kind of this like superwoman resilience that society pushes upon.
Yeah, and I don't know that they are mentally fine always either. I think, you know, they just kind of keep going. I had a client recently, and she worked till she was 36 and 3, and that night it ended with this big charity event that her work had put on, and so it was like kind of final bang before she finished work with that. Her husband had loads to drink at this charity event. They went home 3 hours after they went to bed. Her waters broke, and he couldn't even drive her to hospital because he was still drunk. She had to drive herself there. And then she's just kind of bounced back in a way that I did a video on this, a social media video this week. It's just saying, hide your capes. Don't let people know that if you're out and about doing loads, because then they start putting on you. So she ended up having family members asking her for a lift to places, to appointments and things, because she just bounced back. She kind of carried on. You know, she'd never ever stopped. And you know, oh my goodness.
When we see that, right, because we see it, it's like it's a superwoman syndrome almost. Instead of having baby blues, they're having baby pinks, where they are coping way too well, and you know the whole thing's on adrenaline, and you know that woman is going to crash. Right, it is going to happen. It might happen, you know, 10 days after the baby's born. It might happen 10 weeks or 10 months, but it's going to happen, and it's just not sustainable.
No.
Yeah.
No. We could go on about this all night, Kathy.
Could, and we're going to stop because we're over time. Oh, we're quite over time. I wasn't looking at the clock. Usually when I'm we've got I'm just host. So we will wind this up, but hopefully that was really a good overview and a good explanation as to understanding those differences. Anything final, Freya, that you want to add before we wind up?
No, I think probably the final thing I'd say is not to listen to those throwaway comments. And I suppose, and for anyone who's watching who is a health professional, to be careful with those throwaway comments themselves, because those just can lead to a cascade of people going down rabbit holes, of kind of a cascade of intervention, and they're ending up kind of with unnecessarily putting people into high risk categories when they don't deserve that. And of course we need to keep our eyes out for those genuine IUGRs, but having faith that babies are sometimes smaller and sometimes bigger, but just being careful of those throwaway comments. And for any of you who are pregnant and you've heard those comments, you know, I've had so many people send me details of their scans saying, oh my goodness, you know, and I look at them and I'm kind of like, which bit are you worried about here? Because I can't see anything wrong, you know. And it has been because of one of those throwaway comments. So yeah, keep breathing. keep trusting in your body.
Yeah, and those, but particularly with those large babies, that their heads mold when they're born. Yeah. So their kids all forgotten, you know. In the way back, there was this, you know, decades ago. It's still practiced in some places, unfortunately, but decades ago, you know, there was this kind of thought at one point of, oh, should we X-ray the woman's pelvis and can we predict whether? No, and we realized we can't, because the baby's scalp is designed to fold over itself, and you know, this sagittal suture does, and yeah, so the baby's head molds, and it's not, the skull is not firm, fully ossified, and that's how a baby's head after it's born can so rapidly grow. Because, you know, you look at the head of a newborn and you look at the head of a 6-month-old, well, you know, that's a big growth, and that's because the bones are still fairly soft and they're able to do this. And yeah, so I do recall one, you know, when you've been a midwife for a long time, you've had hundreds and hundreds of births, you know, they all blur together, a lot of them, and that's as it should be. You know, we shouldn't walk down the street and bump into a woman and remember instantly all the details about her birth. No, it all kind of blends in there, but occasionally you get a birth that do kind of stand out in your memory. And I do recall one particular woman who we knew this was a big baby, and it was physiologically big. There was nothing, no you know, gestational diabetes going on, and her partner was a big man, and she was like average size, he was bigger, she was growing a monster baby, and we're all so on edge, we're so ready, you know, and she birthed it so beautifully. I think I just remember the whole birthing suite at the time kind of going, wow, you know, like that was impressive. And no perineal suturing, just you know, she did an amazing job. And then afterwards we found out down the track, once her mother arrived in the country, because she didn't know much about the sizes of history of babies in her family, and found out that that was the normal size for that family. We were all thinking it was to do with the partner. It wasn't. That was the normal size in their family, but nobody had known that history until the mother finally starts to explain that stuff. Anyway, so look, thanks everybody for being here today, and those, of course, who are watching it later down the track. And thanks, Freya. It's so neat to have us talking together on this topic, and
thank you.
Internationally, you know, using Zoom.
Great. Thanks very much.
Okay, we wish everybody a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.